Chapter 4 Sacrifices for Sin. This is also told in Leviticus 6:24-30. The Lord told Moses to say to the community of Israel, "Offer a sacrifice to ask forgiveness when you sin by accidentally doing something I have told you not to do." When the high priest sins, the Lord said, when the high priest sins, he makes everyone else guilty too. And so he must sacrifice a young bull that has nothing wrong with it. The priest will lead the bull to the entrance of the sacred tent, lay his hand on its head, and kill it there. He will take a bowl of the blood inside the tent, dip a finger in the blood, and sprinkle some of it 7 times towards the sacred chest behind the curtain. Then in my presence, he will smear some of the blood on each of the 4 corners of the incense altar, before pouring out the rest at the foot of the bronze altar near the entrance to the tent. The priest will remove the fat from the bull, just as he does when he sacrifices a bull to ask my blessing. This includes the fat on the insides, as well as the lower part of the liver and the 2 kidneys with their fat. He will then send it all up in smoke. The skin and flesh of the bull, together with its legs, insides, and the foot still in its stomach, as to be taken outside the camp and burnt on the wood fire near the ash heap. When the whole nation sins, the Lord said, when the nation of Israel disobeys me without meaning to, the whole nation is still guilty. Once you realize what has happened, you must sacrifice a young bull to ask my forgiveness. Lead the bull to the entrance of the sacred tent, where your tribal leaders will lay their hands on its head, before having it killed in my presence. The priest will take a bowl of the animal's blood inside the sacred tent, dip a finger in the blood, and sprinkle some of it 7 times towards the sacred chest behind the curtain. Then in my presence he must smear some of the blood on each of the 4 corners of the incense altar, before pouring out the rest at the foot of the bronze altar near the entrance to the tent. After this, the priest will remove the fat from the bull and send it up in smoke on the altar. Finally, he will burn its remains outside the camp, just as he did with the other bull. By this sacrifice, the sin of the whole nation will be forgiven. When a tribal leader sins, the Lord God said, any tribal leader who disobeys me without meaning to is still guilty. As soon as the leader realizes what has happened, he must sacrifice a goat that has nothing wrong with it. This is a sacrifice for sin. So he will lay his hand on the animal's head, before having it killed in my presence at the north side of the bronze altar. The priest will dip a finger in the blood, smear some of it on each of the 4 corners of the altar, and pour out the rest at the foot of the altar. Then he must send all the fat up in smoke, just as he does when a sacrifice is offered to ask my blessing. By this sacrifice, the leader's sin will be forgiven. When ordinary people sin, the Lord said, when any of your ordinary people disobey me without meaning to, you are still guilty. As soon as you realize what you have done, you must sacrifice a female goat that has nothing wrong with it. Lead the goat to the north side of the bronze altar and lay your hand on its head, before having it killed. Then a priest will dip a finger in the blood. He will smear some of it on each of the 4 corners of the altar and pour out the rest at the foot of the altar. After this, the priest will remove all the fat, just as he does when an animal is sacrificed to ask my blessing. The priest will then send the fat up in smoke with a smell that pleases me. This animal is sacrificed so that I will forgive you ordinary people when you sin. If you offer a lamb instead of a goat as a sacrifice for sin, it must be a female that has nothing wrong with it. Lead the lamb to the altar and lay your hand on its head before having it killed. Priest will dip a finger in the blood, smear some of it on each of the four corners of the altar, and pour out the rest at the foot of the altar. After this, all the fat must be removed, just as when an animal is sacrificed to ask my blessing. Then the priest will send it up in smoke to me, together with the food offering, and your sin will be forgiven. Chapter 5. The Lord said, if you refuse to testify in court about something you saw or know has happened, you have sinned and can be punished. You are guilty and unfit to worship me if you accidentally touch the dead body of any kind of unclean animal. You are guilty if you find out that you have accidentally touched any waste that comes from a human body. You are guilty the moment you realize that you have made a hasty promise to do something good or bad. As soon as you discover that you have committed any of these sins, you must confess what you have done. Then you must bring a female sheep or goat to me as the price for your sin. A priest will sacrifice the animal and you will be forgiven. If you are poor and cannot afford to bring an animal, you may bring 2 doves or 2 pigeons. One of these will be a sacrifice to ask my forgiveness, and the other will be a sacrifice to please me. Give both birds to the priest who will offer one as a sacrifice to ask my forgiveness. He will wring its neck without tearing off its head. Splatter some of its blood on one side of the bronze altar and drain out the rest at the foot of the altar. Then he will follow the proper rules for offering the other bird as a sacrifice to please me. You will be forgiven when the priest offers these sacrifices as the price for your sin. If you are so poor that you cannot afford doves or pigeons, you may bring 1 kilogram of your finest flour. This is a sacrifice to ask my forgiveness, so don't sprinkle olive oil or sweet-smelling incense on it. Give the flour to a priest who will scoop up a handful and send it up in smoke together with the other offerings. This is a reminder that all the flour belongs to me. By offering this sacrifice, the priest pays the price for any of these sins you may have committed. The priest gets the rest of the flour, just as he does with grain sacrifices. Sacrifices to make things right. This is also told in Leviticus 7:1-10. The Lord told Moses what the people must do to make things right when they find out they have cheated the Lord without meaning to. If this happens, you must either sacrifice a ram that has nothing wrong with it or else pay the price of a ram with the official money used by the priest. In addition, you must pay what you owe plus a fine of 20%. Then the priest will offer the ram as a sacrifice to make things right, and you will be forgiven. If you break any of my commands without meaning to, you are still guilty, and you can be punished. When you realize what you have done, you must either bring to the priest a ram that has nothing wrong with it or else pay him for one. The priest will then offer it as a sacrifice to make things right, and you will be forgiven. Chapter 6. Other sins that need sacrifices or payments. This is also told in Numbers, chapter 5:5-10. The Lord told Moses what the people must do when they commit other sins against the Lord. You have sinned if you rob or cheat someone, if you keep back money or valuables left in your care, or if you find something and claim not to have it. When this happens, you must return what doesn't belong to you and pay the owner a fine of 20%. In addition, you must either bring to the priest a ram that has nothing wrong with it, or else pay him for one. The priest will then offer it as a sacrifice to make things right, and you will be forgiven for what you did wrong. Daily sacrifices. This is also told in Exodus 29:38-43. Numbers 28, 1-8. The Lord told Moses to tell Aaron and his sons how to offer the daily sacrifices that are sent up in smoke to please the Lord. You must put the animal for the sacrifice on the altar in the evening and let it stay there all night. But make sure the fire keeps burning. The next morning you will dress in your priestly clothes, including your linen underwear. Then clean away the ashes left by the sacrifices and pile them beside the altar. Change into your everyday clothes. Take the ashes outside the camp and pile them in the special place. The fire must never go out, so put wood on it each morning. After this, you are to lay an animal on the altar next to the fat that you sacrifice to ask my blessing. Then send it all up in smoke to me. The altar fire must always be kept burning. It must never go out. Sacrifices to give thanks to the Lord. The Lord said, when someone offers a sacrifice to give thanks to me, the priest from Aaron's family must bring it to the front of the bronze altar, where one of them will scoop up a handful of the flour and oil, together with all the incense on it. Then, to show that the whole offering belongs to me, he will lay all of this on the altar and send it up in smoke with a smell that pleases me. The rest of it is to be baked without yeast and eaten by the priest in the sacred courtyard of the sacred tent. This bread is very holy, just like the sacrifices for sin or for making things right, and I have given this part to the priest from what is offered to me on the altar. Only the men in Aaron's family are allowed to eat this bread, and they must go through a ceremony to be made holy before touching it. This law will never change. When priests are ordained, the Lord spoke to Moses and told him what sacrifices the priests must offer on the morning and evening of the day they are ordained. It is the same as the regular morning and evening sacrifices: 1/2 kilogram of flour mixed with olive oil and cooked in a shallow pan. The bread must then be crumbled into all pieces and sent up in smoke with a smell that pleases me. If each of Aaron's descendants who is ordained as a priest must perform this ceremony and make sure that the bread is completely burnt on the altar. None of it may be eaten. Sacrifices for sin. This is also told in Leviticus 4, 1 and 2. The Lord told Moses how the priests from Aaron's family were to offer the sacrifice for sin. This sacrifice is very sacred, and the animal must be killed in my presence at the north side of the bronze altar. The priest who offers this sacrifice must eat it in the sacred courtyard of the sacred tent, and anyone or anything that touches the meat will be holy. If any of the animal's blood is splattered on the clothes of the priest, they must be washed in a holy place. If the meat was cooked in a clay pot, the pot must be destroyed. But if it was cooked in a bronze pot, the pot must be scrubbed and rinsed with water. This sacrifice is very holy, and only the priests may have any part of it. None of the meat may be eaten from the sacrifices for sin that require blood to be brought into the sacred tent. These sacrifices must be completely burnt. Chapter 7, Sacrifices to make things right. This is also told in Leviticus chapter 5, 14-19. The Lord said, the sacrifice to make the things right is very sacred. The animal must be killed in the same place where the sacrifice to please me is killed. and the animal's blood must be splattered against the four sides of the bronze altar. Offer all the animal's fat, including the fat on its tail and on its insides, as well as the lower part of the liver and the two kidneys with their fat. One of the priests will lay these pieces on the altar and send them up in smoke to me. This sacrifice for making things right is very holy. Only the priests may eat it, and they must eat it in a holy place. The ceremony for this sacrifice and the one for sin are alike, and the meat may be eaten only by the priest who performs this ceremony of forgiveness. In fact, the priest who offers a sacrifice to please me may keep the skin of the animal, just as he may eat the bread from a sacrifice to give thanks to me. All other grain sacrifices, with or without olive oil in them, are to be divided equally among the priests of Aaron's family. Sacrifices to ask the Lord's blessing. The Lord said, "Here are the instructions for offering a sacrifice to ask my blessing. If you offer it to give thanks, you must offer some bread together with it. Use the finest flour to make 3 kinds of bread without yeast, 2 in the form of loaves mixed with olive oil, and 1 in the form of thin wafers brushed with oil. You must also make some bread with yeast. Give me 1 loaf or wafer from each of these 4 kinds of bread, after which they will belong to the priest who splattered the blood against the bronze altar. When you offer an animal to ask a blessing from me or to thank me, the meat belongs to you, but it must be eaten the same day. It is different with the sacrifices you offer when you make me a promise or voluntarily give me something. The meat from those sacrifices may be kept and eaten the next day, but any that is left must be destroyed. If you eat any after the second day, your sacrifice will be useless and unacceptable, and you will be both disgusting and guilty. Don't eat any of the meat that touches something unclean. Instead, burn it. The rest of the meat may be eaten by anyone who is clean and acceptable to me. But don't eat any of this meat if you have become unclean by touching something unclean from a human or an animal or from any other creature. If you do, you will no longer belong to the community of Israel. The Lord told Moses to say to the people, "Don't eat the fat of cattle, sheep, or goats. If one of your animals dies or is killed by some wild animal, you may do anything with its fat except eat it. If you eat the fat of an animal that can be used as a sacrifice to me, you will no longer belong to the community of Israel. And no matter where you live, you must not eat the blood of any bird or animal, or you will no longer belong to the community of Israel." The Lord also told Moses to say to the people of Israel, "If you want to offer a sacrifice to ask my blessing, you must bring the part to be burnt and lay it on the bronze altar. But you must first lift up the choice ribs with their fat to show that the offering is dedicated to me. A priest from Aaron's family will then send the fat up in smoke, but the ribs belong to the priest. The upper joint of the right hind leg is for the priest who offers the blood and the fat of the animal. I have decided that the people of Israel must always give the choice ribs and the upper joint of the right hind leg to Aaron's descendants who have been ordained as priests to serve me. This law will never change. I am the Lord. These are the ceremonies for sacrifices to please the Lord, to give him thanks and to ask him blessing or his forgiveness, as well as the ceremonies for those sacrifices that demand a payment and for the sacrifices that are offered when priests are ordained. While Moses and the people of Israel were in the desert at Mount Sinai, the Lord commanded them to start offering these sacrifices.